One of the specific examples was 1992 when the Afghan Mujahideen defeated the communist leader Najibullah and they hanged him in Kabul. The expectation was, in all the Islamist circles that I was familiar with, including our own group, was that now the Mujahideen would establish the glorious Islamic State. They would establish Sharia in Afghanistan. It would be like paradise on earth, if you like, utopia. And then this revolution would expand to neighboring countries. So Pakistan would join, Iran would join. Eventually, it would spread to Saudi Arabia, and beyond it, you'd have the global Islamic Caliphate. And things began to go wrong immediately. Instead of this unified Islamic State of Afghanistan, what happened next for the next 4 years was a vicious civil war, and that was a huge shock. It's something like, hold on, what happened there that provided some doubt about the whole venture, the whole project of an Islamic State, a glorious Islamic State achieved through jihad. It simply didn't happen. And then there were many other things. For me, moving away from extremism was primarily intellectual in terms of my understanding of the Quran and the scriptures and hadith. I began to reading widely, and I read more and more interpretations of the Quran and realized there were many different perspectives. Whereas in our group we're always taught that the truth is like this, the scripture means only this, and every other interpretation is wrong. But the more I read about the history of the great Muslim theologians and their beliefs and their commentary on the Quran, I realized that just doesn't fit. Islam for 14 centuries has had many, many different interpretations, and they're followed widely around the world by Muslims who all agree on the basic goodness of faith and prayers and this and that, and are good, decent human beings. And it became more and more clear that it's politics and sectarianism and rivalry which leads to all the divisions. And especially when you read Islamic history, just reading history shatters a lot of the simplistic notions we were taught early on. So, for example, the idea which we swallowed from Hizb ut-Tahrir about the caliphate was that you must have a caliphate, and Muslims were always great and glorious while they had the caliphate throughout their history until 1924, when the Ottoman Caliphate ended, and that was a Western conspiracy, they say, to weaken Islam. But anybody who studies basics of history knows that the so-called caliphate for most of this time was actually a monarchy, and often an absolute monarchy, often a very tyrannical monarchy. And it was nothing like the first caliphate immediately after the time of the Prophet, which is the earliest ideal or utopia for Sunni Muslims, certainly. Plus, of course, I was by now a professional scientist. I had a PhD in engineering and sciences. I was taught to think critically and rationally and logically, and I applied a lot of that logic to a lot of the teaching of our group, which had very narrow interpretation and very superficial interpretations. And I knew from a long time ago that those interpretations are just wrong. So the number one influence in my life, as I said, for a good decade, was the leader of our Salafi group. And he led by example. He went off to fight himself on the front line in Afghanistan, Kashmir, Burma, even he went to. So there was no questioning his sincerity and dedication. The only people really who would have outweighed his influence, because he was so charismatic and influential, were really in the end parents. And parents didn't know all the details of what we were learning in our groups, but overall felt this is good. Our children are in devout Muslim circles and they're doing jihad, and they supported that. If they'd had a different viewpoint, possibly if some of my teachers had, but that's unlikely because our leader was also a great teacher, and his influence would have outweighed others. So to answer it properly, the only people who could have said something else were our parents. And in fact, it has to be said, the parents would not have approved of most of the hate preaching and some of the more extremist kind of hardened attitudes, and some of the rudeness and arrogance that goes with that kind of zeal. In fact, they did often tell us off for that, for the rudeness and arrogance. But actually didn't know what to do about it, because we were headstrong young men who thought we knew everything. and we weren't going to be kind of swayed in our cause. So that was going to always be very difficult. If somebody else had intervened with our group leader, that might have made a big difference, of course, and he did, of course, slowly then changed tack and took people with him. But the group dynamics was such that we were very much like a cult. And looking back, the three rival groups were all cults. I mean, a lot of extreme religious groups and political groups, in my experience, are very cultish. And so all the ways that we know about how cults operate and how you can try to deal with cults or deprogram those cults, I think all those skills and resources should be used in dealing with people vulnerable to these kinds of groups. I should mention, in terms of my journey out of extremism, one of the most influential figures who I felt was a massive influence in my life for about 10 years, another decade, without having met him, was Hamza Yusuf of the US, Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, because he was somebody who was very learned, who knows the scripture very well, very fluent Arabic, but also very spiritual, had a very deep understanding of Western society and culture, and was able to fuse the two. And so when I was a bit older, I found him very, very inspiring, and he helped broaden my mind about the way we understand religion. Actually, also my father-in-law, I have to say, because my father-in-law is also a religious scholar. So I got married, just under the age of 24. My wife and her family, they were from a slightly different strand of Islam, Muslim Brotherhood linked, actually. So politically, I would still say quite extreme, but socially much more balanced and softer, and not into, for example, hate preaching against non-Muslims. They've never been into that. Would always be against that. And my wife's father is also a religious scholar as well as a law professor and a politician. He served as a senator in Pakistan for 10 years, served as a minister under General Zia. A very good diplomat. And so listening to him, and he mentored me, if you like, as his first son-in-law, to give me lots of books to read, and discussed issues very patiently and calmly with me, because he's actually 10 years older than my dad. So, often he would have a different perspective from me or my dad, but I've never seen him get angry or get annoyed. He would discuss everything in religion, politics, with a lot of experience and very calmly and wisely.